to Scene 1 of the Diary of Anne Frank play. In the darkness we hear Anne's voice, again reading from the diary. Saturday, the 1st of January, 1944. Another new year has begun, and we find ourselves still in our hiding place. We have been here now for 1 year, 5 months, and 25 days. It seems that our life is at a standstill. The curtain rises on the scene. It is late afternoon, and everyone is bundled up against the cold. In the main room, Mrs. Frank is taking down the laundry, which is hung across the back. Mr. Frank sits in the chair down left, reading. Margot is lying on the couch with a blanket over her and the many-colored knitted scarf around her throat. Anne is seated at the center table, writing in her diary. Peter, Mr. and Mrs. Van Don, and Dussel are all in their own rooms, reading or lying down. As the lights dim on, Anne's voice continues without a break. "It's Meep!" Mr. Frank goes quickly down the steps and unbolts the door. Mrs. Frank calls upstairs to the Van Dons and then to Peter. "Wake up, everyone! Meep is here!" Anne quickly puts her diary away, and Margot sits up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Mr. Dussel sits on the edge of his bed, listening, disgruntled. Meep comes up the steps, followed by Mr. Crayler. They bring flowers, books, newspapers, etc. Anne rushes to Meep, throwing her arms affectionately around her. "Meep and Mr. Crayler, what a delightful surprise!" "We came to bring you New Year's greetings." "You shouldn't. You should have at least 1 day to yourselves." She goes quickly to the stove and brings down teacups and tea for all of them. "Don't say that. It's so wonderful to see them. I can smell the wind and cold on your clothes." "There you are. How are you, Margot? Feeling any better?" "I'm all right." We filled her full of every kind of pill so she won't cough and make a noise. Anne runs into her room to put the flowers in water, and Mr. and Mrs. Van Don come from upstairs. Outside there is the sound of a band playing. "Well, hello, Meep, Mr. Crayler." Mr. Crayler gives a bouquet of flowers to Mrs. Van Don. "With my hope for peace in the new year." "Meep, have you seen Mooshy? Have you seen him anywhere around?" "I'm sorry, Peter. I asked everyone in the neighborhood had they seen a gray cat, but they said no." Mrs. Frank gives Meep a cup of tea. Mr. Frank comes up the steps, carrying a small cake on a plate. "Look what Meep's brought for us." "A cake?" "A cake?" He pinches Meep's cheeks gaily and hurries up to the cupboard. "I'll get some plates." Dussel in his room hastily puts a coat on and starts out to join the others. "Thank you, Meepia. You shouldn't have done it. You must have used all of your sugar ration for weeks," giving it to Mrs. Van Don. It's beautiful, isn't it? Oh, it's been ages since I even saw a cake. Not since you brought one last year. Remember? Don't you remember you gave us one on New Year's Day, just this time last year? I'll never forget it, because you had said peace in 1943 on it. She looks at the cake and reads, "Peace in 1944. Well, it has come some time, you know. Hello, Mr. Dussel. How are you?" "Here's the knife, Leafy. Now, how many of us are there?" "None for me, thank you." "Oh, please, you must." "I couldn't." "Good. That leaves 1, 2, 3, 7 of us." Eight. It's the same number as it always is." "I left Margot out. I take it for granted Margot won't need any." "Why wouldn't she?" "I think it won't harm her." All right. I just didn't want her to start coughing again, that's all." "And please, Mrs. Frank should cut the cake." "What's the difference?" "It's not Mrs. Frank's cake, is it, Meep? It's for all of us." "Mrs. Frank divides things better." "What are you trying to say?" "Oh, come on. Stop wasting time. Don't I always give everyone exactly the same? Don't I?" "Forget it, Curly." "No, I want an answer. Don't I?" Yes. Everybody gets exactly the same, except Mr. Van Don always gets a little bit more." Mr. Van Don advances on Dussel, the knife still in his hand. "That's a lie." Dussel retreats before the onslaught of the Van Dons. Please. You see what a little sugar cake does to us? It goes right to our heads." "Here you are, Mr. Frank." "Thank you. Are you sure you won't have some?" No, really, I have to go in a minute. The sound of the band fades out in the distance. Maybe Mushi went back to our house. They say that cats. Do you ever get over there? I mean, do you suppose you could? I'll try, Peter. The first minute I get, I'll try, but I'm afraid, with him gone a week. Make up your mind. Already someone has had a nice big dinner from the cat. Peter is furious, inarticulate. He starts toward Dussel as if to hit him. Mr. Frank stops him, and Mrs. Frank speaks quickly to ease the situation. Oh, this is delicious, Meep. Delicious. Dirk's in luck to get a girl who can bake like this. I have to run. Dirk's taking me to a party tonight. How heavenly. Remember now what everyone is wearing, and what you have to eat and everything, so you can tell us tomorrow. I'll give you a full report. Goodbye, everyone. Just a minute. There's something I'd like you to do for me. He hurries off up the stairs to his room. Pooty, where are you going? She rushes up the stairs after him, calling hysterically. What do you want, Pooty? What are you going to do? What's wrong? Father says he's going to sell her fur coat. She's crazy about that fur coat. Is it possible that anyone is so silly as to worry about a fur coat in times like this? It's none of your darn business, and if you say one more thing, I'll take you, and I mean it. There is a piercing scream from Mrs. Van Don above. She grabs at the fur coat as Mr. Van Don is starting downstairs with it. No, no, no! Don't you dare take that! You hear? It's mine! My father gave me that. You didn't give it to me. You have no right. Let go of it. You hear? Mr. Van Don pulls the coat from her hands and hurries downstairs. Mrs. Van Don sinks to the floor, sobbing. As Mr. Van Don comes into the main room, the others look away, embarrassed for him. Just a little discussion over the advisability of selling this coat. As I have often reminded Mrs. Van Don, it's very selfish of her to keep it when people outside are in such desperate need of clothing. So if you will please to sell it for us, it could fetch a good price. And by the way, will you get me my cigarettes? I don't care what kind they are. Get all you can. It's terribly difficult to get them, Mr. Van Don, but I'll try. Goodbye. Meep leaves. Mr. Frank follows her down the steps to bolt the door after her, and Mrs. Frank gives Mr. Crayler a cup of tea. Are you sure you won't have some cake, Mr. Crayler? I better not. You are still feeling badly? What does your doctor say? I haven't been to him. Now, Mr. Crayler. Oh, I tried, but you can't get near a doctor these days. They're so busy. After weeks, I finally managed to get one on the telephone. I told him I'd like an appointment. I wasn't feeling very well. You know what he answers over the telephone? Stick out your tongue. Everyone laughs, and they turn to Mr. Frank as Mr. Frank comes back. I have some contracts here. I wondered if you'd look over them with me. Of course. If we could go downstairs. Mr. Frank starts ahead, and Mr. Crayler speaks to the others. Will you forgive us? I won't keep him but a minute. He starts to follow Mr. Frank downstairs. What's happened? Something's happened, hasn't it, Mr. Crayler? Mr. Crayler stops and comes back, trying to reassure Margot with a pretense of casualness. No, really, I want your father's advice. Something's gone wrong. I know it. If it's something that concerns us here, it's better that we all hear it. But the children. What they'd imagine would be worse than any reality. As Mr. Crayler speaks, they all listen with intense apprehension. Mrs. Van Don comes down the stairs and sits on the bottom step. It's a man in the storeroom. I don't know whether or not you remember him. Carl, about 50, heavy-set, nearsighted. He came with us just before you left. He was from Utrecht? That's the man. A couple of weeks ago when I was in the storeroom, he closed the door and asked me, How's Mr. Frank? What do you hear from Mr. Frank? I told him I only knew that there was a rumor that you were in Switzerland. He said he'd heard that rumor too, but he thought I might know something more. I didn't pay any attention to it, but then a thing happened yesterday. He'd brought some invoices to the office for me to sign. As I was going through them, I looked up. He was standing, staring at the bookcase. Your bookcase. He said he thought he remembered a door there. Wasn't there a door there that used to go up to the loft? Then he told me he wanted more money, 20 guilders more a week. Blackmail. 20 guilders. Very modest blackmail. That's just the beginning. You know what I think? He was the thief who was down there that night. That's how he knows we're here. How was it left? What did you tell him? I said I had to think about it. What shall I do? Pay him the money? Take a chance on firing him? Or what? I don't know. For God's sake, don't fire him. Pay him what he asks. Keep him where you can have an eye on him. Is it so much that he's asking? What are they paying nowadays? He could get it in a war plant, but this isn't a war plant. Mind you, I don't know if he really knows or if he doesn't know. Offer him half, then we'll soon find out if it's blackmail or not. And if it is, we've got to pay it, haven't we? Anything he asks, we've got to pay. Let's decide that when the time comes. This may be all in my imagination. You get to a point these days where you suspect everyone and everything, again and again. On some simple look or word, I've found myself. The telephone rings in the office below. There's the telephone. What does that mean? The telephone ringing on a holiday? That's my wife. I told her I had to go over some papers at the office to call me there when she got out of church. I'll offer him half then. Goodbye. We'll hope for the best. The group call their goodbyes half-heartedly. Mr. Frank follows Mr. Kraler to bolt the door below, and during the following scene, Mr. Frank comes back up and stands listening, disturbed. You can thank your son for this. Smashing the light. I tell you, it's just a question of time now. He goes to the window at the back and stands looking out. Sometimes I wish the end would come, whatever it is. Margot! Anne goes to Margot, sitting beside her on the couch with her arms around her. Then at least we know where we were. You should be ashamed of yourself talking that way. Think how lucky we are. Think of the thousands dying in the war every day. Think of the people in concentration camps. What's the good of that? What's the good of thinking of misery when you're already miserable? That's stupid. Anne! As Anne goes on, raging at her mother, Mrs. Frank tries to break in in an effort to quiet her. We're young, Margot and Peter and I. You grown-ups have had your chance, but look at us. If we begin thinking of all the horror in the world, we're lost. We're trying to hold on to some kind of ideals, when everything, ideals, hopes, everything, are being destroyed. It isn't our fault that the world is such a mess. We weren't around when all this started, so don't try to take it all out on us. She rushes off to her room, slamming the door after her. She picks up a brush from the chest and hurls it to the floor. Then she sits on the settee, trying to control her anger. She talks as if we started the war. Did we start the war? He spots Anne's cakes as he starts to take it. Peter anticipates him. She left her cake. Peter starts for Anne's room with the cake. There is silence in the main room, and Mrs. Van Don goes up to her room, followed by Mr. Van Don. Dussel stays looking out at the window. Mr. Frank brings Mrs. Frank her cake. She eats it slowly without relish. Mr. Frank takes his cake to Margot and sits quietly on the sofa beside her. Peter stands in the doorway of Anne's darkened room, looking at her, and then makes a little movement to let her know that he is there. Anne sits up quickly, trying to hide the signs of her tears. Peter holds out the cake to her. You left this. Thanks. Peter starts to go out, then comes back. I thought you were fine just now. You know just how to talk to them. You know just how to say it. I'm no good. I never can think, especially when I'm mad. That Dussel, when he said that about Mushi, someone eating him, all I could think is, I wanted to hit him. I wanted to give him such that's what I used to do when there was an argument at school. That's the way but here, and an old man like that, it wouldn't be so good. You're making a big mistake about me. I do it all wrong. I say too much. I go too far. I hurt people's feelings. I think you're just fine. What I want to say, if it wasn't for you around here, I don't know what I mean. Peter is interrupted by Dussel's turning on the light. Dussel stands in the doorway, startled to see Peter. Peter advances toward him, forbiddingly. Dussel backs out of the room, and Peter closes the door on him. Do you mean it, Peter? Do you really mean it? I said it, didn't I? Oh, thank you, Peter. In the main room, Mr. and Mrs. Frank collect the dishes and take them to the sink, washing them. Margot lies down again on the couch, and Dussel, lost, wanders into Peter's room and takes up a book, starting to read. Peter looks at the photographs on the wall. You've got quite a collection. Wouldn't you like some in your room? I could give you some. Heaven knows you spend enough time in there doing heaven knows what. It's easier. A fight starts or an argument. I duck in there. You are lucky having a room to go to. His lordship is always here. I hardly ever get a minute alone. When they start in on me, I can't duck away. I have to stand there and take it. You gave some of it back just now. I get so mad. They've formed their opinions about everything, but we're still trying to find we have problems here that no other people our age have ever had. And just as you think you've solved them, something comes along and bang, you have to start all over again. At least you've got someone to talk to. Not really. Mother. I never discuss anything serious with her. She doesn't understand. Father's all right. We can talk about everything but one thing. Mother. He simply won't talk about her. I don't think you can be really intimate with anyone if he holds something back. Do you? I think your father's fine. Oh, he is, Peter, he is. He's the only one who's ever given me the feeling that I have any sense, but anyway, nothing can take the place of school and play and friends of your own age, or near your age, can it? I suppose you miss your friends and all. It isn't just... Isn't it funny, you and I? Here we've been seeing each other every minute for almost a year and a half, and this is the first time we've ever really talked. It helps to have a lot to have someone to talk to. Don't you think? It helps you to let off steam. Well, anytime you want to let off steam, you can come to my room. I can get up an awful lot of steam. You'll have to be careful how you say that. It's all right with me. Do you mean it? I said it, didn't I? We've had bad news. The people from whom Meep got our ration books have been arrested, so we have had to cut down our food. Our stomachs are so empty that they rumble and make strange noises, all in different keys. Mr. Van Don's is deep and low like a bass fiddle. Mine is a high, whistling like a flute. As we all sit around waiting for supper, it's like an orchestra tuning up. It only needs Toscanini to raise his baton, and we'd be off in the ride of the Valkyries. Monday, the 6th of March, 1942. Mr. Kraler is in the hospital. It seems he has ulcers. Pym says we are his ulcers. Meep has to run the business, and us too. The Americans have landed on the southern tip of Italy. Father looks for a quick finish to the war. Mr. Dussel is waiting every day for the warehouse man to demand more money. Have I been skipping too much from one subject to another? I can't help it. I feel that spring is coming. I feel it in my whole body and soul. I feel utterly confused. I am longing, so longing, for everything. For friends, for someone to talk to, someone who understands, someone young who feels as I do.